On this podcast, we hear a lot of ideas about learning. We hear a lot of strongly held beliefs about learning, but where's the evidence? Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what? Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool.
Evidence-based practice is an idea that started in medicine in the 1990s and spread to other occupational practice areas such as law, public policy, management, education, and yes, learning. It says that we should base our learning practice on science, rather than tradition, intuition, or that necessarily limited and generally not well organised body of evidence, individual experience. But knowing that a drug worked in medicine is a different thing entirely from knowing whether your training program worked. So people argue that in our field, we should talk about not evidence-based, but evidence-informed learning. Our guest this time on The Learning Hack argues passionately for just that thing. Kate Fitzgerald, Head of Fact, tell us about her.
Hack facts.
Mirjam Neelen is Head of Global Learning Design and Learning Sciences at Novartis. Starting her career as a speech therapist, she has worked in a wide variety of learning design roles in organisations such as Accenture, Google and Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Her 2020 book, Evidence-Informed Learning Design, co-authored with Paul Kirschner, has been described as a clear roadmap for finding, judging and applying evidence-informed methods, and also as brutally honest about the fallacies and myths that hinder practice.
That book has been really influential in our space, and I wanted to know why Mirjam thought it had struck such a chord, but that was just one theme of our discussion. Jay Curtis, Head of Themes. What else did we talk about?
Frankly, there's a lot of hype and snake oil in the learning space, so it's not surprising, I suppose, that there's also a lot of debunking. But Mirjam Neelen goes much further here than just calling out people who are spreading fake news. She's giving people the tools they need to tell good science from bad and to be more evidence-informed in their learning work.
For me, this conversation was a real eye-opener about what the job really is now for learning professionals. That job, quite simply, is to stop being taken in by the keynote Kaisers, the clickbait cloggers, the TED Talk demagogues, and the rest of the guano vendors. And this is how you do it. Welcome to The Learning Hack, Mirjam. You're a well-known thought leader, speaker and author. So how do you manage to combine all that with also holding down a very high-powered practitioner role as Head of Global Learning Design and Learning Sciences at Novartis?
Yeah, I wonder about that myself sometimes. Well, first of all, I just love reading, and the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. So then at least that's how I experience it. So then it's only, you're only prompted to do more. I must say that now that I'm in my new role, I have to be a bit more conscious about what I focus on. So I try to be a bit smarter, as in, picking topics that are relevant for what I'm working on at that point at work, and trying to really focus on one thing for a while. But to me, it's always been like part of my professional development. Like the blog that I have with Paul Kirschner has been my professional development basically over the last couple of years, because just the reading and then the writing and, Paul reviewing my writing and giving me feedback, me reading what he's writing and giving him feedback. So it's just that whole process in itself, you learn so much from that. So it's just really valuable to me, and I keep making time for it. So
Yeah. So learning is working is learning. I mean,
but the writing is not really that, right? Because it is really it is that space where you really are able to reflect on things, because work is often so crazy that you keep doing but you don't always realize why or what things mean, and language is not very precise often. So to me, it is actually taking a step back and using my brain in a different way. That's it.
Okay. So I'd mostly like to talk in this interview about your recent book, Evidence-Informed Learning Design, which it seems has really struck a chord with people. Don't take my word for it. This is a necessary book, says Donald Taylor, and it comes at an important time. In the book, you say we're not doing enough to utilize evidence from the learning sciences and the design of our learning experiences, and that we need to move beyond opinion and intuition. Why do you think that message has resonated with people in the moment we're in right now?
I think it's mostly time in itself, where multiple voices have spread the message for a while now, so that it aggregates over time, like the strength of that message. I also think it's because I see it almost like the evidence informed, the way we discuss it in our book is that it's about, data from like systems or people or whatever, and then people's expertise. And the third one, on which we focus, is the scientific evidence. But I think there's also, because there's a lot of eyes on data in general, right? Like data analytics, data science, that just became more popular over time as well. So that's also a part of evidence informed. So I think that together with all the voices that have been talking about the learning sciences for a while, together kind of create a stronger message that we need more evidence to make informed decisions. I also think that people do start to realize that we need to change our practice to add value and stay relevant for the business. Not necessarily being around, the robots are coming and taking over our jobs. But there is, like when you look at what L&D has been doing in the last, I don't know how many years, it is a lot of operational stuff, a lot of order taking still, like service delivery, where a lot of content, a lot of consumption based stuff, quite low level value from a business perspective. So I think there is a realization that we need to change our practice to add more value. Would be my take on it.
People want to get more evidence informed in their practice. One of the surprises for me in the book was to see a definition of the learning sciences, which I hadn't seen before actually, and see actually how broad a range of disciplines they span: psychology, sociology, anthropology, and even philosophy, and IT's in there. You say in the book we can get better and it's not that hard, but that does seem like an awful lot of ground to cover if you're starting out, or if you came from a not very academic background and you're trying to up your game.
It is. I mean, I don't think we're saying it's not a lot of work. And of course, it depends on where you want to go, if it's hard or not. I do think that realizing that there is so many different fields feeding into the learning sciences, that awareness already helps. I think, because I think we're now in a state where loads of practitioners are not aware that there is such a thing as the learning sciences that actually gives us evidence around our practice and helps us make better informed decisions for our practice. And of course, you cannot be an expert in everything. I know I'm definitely not. I think it's a matter of focusing on what matters for learning, like the basics, the foundations. I have like this book here from Kirschner and Hendrik, which I would really recommend if you want to start. It's called How Learning Happens.
Yeah.
And because it is a bit focused on educational stuff, but what it does is it really discusses the most foundational theories that we have. And if you understand that those are out there, that's where we need to stand on these giant shoulders, right? Like that's, I think, that realization that a lot of things that we call new are not new. Like these theories have been around forever, like that's, I think, already a great starting point. Just that awareness that there is so much to know and you don't know that much. And of course, I would say just start with what matters to you and what you're passionate about. Like some people know a lot about motivation, some people know a lot about memory, some people know a lot about habits, or you can't know everything. It's just impossible. Just start.
Changing gear slightly, you cover a couple of areas that are being touted as the future of learning in a lot of places, specifically neuroscience and artificial intelligence, AI. And I wouldn't say you exactly pour cold water on those hopes, but it's a very sober assessment that you give. How should we think about the possibilities of those two fields for learning going forward? Maybe you'd want to take them one at a time. Neuroscience.
What do you mean exactly when you say sober assessment?
Well, I mean, we do read an awful lot of hype about kind of neuroscience is, because we know so much about the brain now, much more than we did, and it's a really active developing science, neuroscience, that can feed directly in to help us. But you say that the feed in, the read across isn't as direct as we think it is.
Yeah, I am. That's based on, I mean, I'm not going to claim that I've spoken to every neuroscientist in the world, but the ones that we have engaged with are pretty clear. That the knowledge of how our brain works is actually still quite immature. And the second part is that it's not about practical implications. It's scientific. And although there is this, integration between neuroimaging techniques and behavior, they definitely look at both. There's very little so far that we can actually apply in practice or has any implications around what we can apply in practice, except maybe from we need sleep because then our memory consolidates things. We already knew, and everybody knows that sleep is healthy for almost everything. So I'm not that impressed by that type of information. I also think that it's, I mean, my biggest pet peeve with neuroscience is how much it is abused, as in, especially with like neuroimaging techniques, people showing these cool looking, brain images and then explain something around what that means for us in practice. It's just not possible. It's just wrong. Yeah. And the other thing that really irritates and frustrates me is, things like dopamine being claimed as the happy hormone. Like if you talk, like Daniel Ansari discusses it in our book, that we know very little about dopamine. We know it's involved in like the fine motor system, for example, but the idea that dopamine influences motivation is just plain wrong. It's just not true. And it's a neurotransmitter that regulates the system and it's value free, and just applying just a positive value to it. It's just, I think it's harmful because it gives us the sense that we know so much and that we know what we're doing and that we're making decisions based on this hard science. And it's not, and it's falsely claiming expertise if you claim that you know so much about neuroscience and this is how you apply it in practice. I think that's harmful and not necessary, because we do know so much about cognitive science and behavioral science and social science. You don't have to claim it's something else. I think it's because people are more attracted to neuroscience. Somehow people are really fascinated by the brain, and I'm too. I love it. Like, I love things from neuroscience and about the brain. I think it's fascinating. It doesn't necessarily mean it changes our practice. And I don't know what the future brings. It might change.
So you do, one does hear a lot of presentations, or as in the past, where people say the part of the brain that governs, for instance, making this up, the part of the brain that covers emotion is very close to the part of the brain that processes images or processes video. So use a video to engage people emotionally. You get that kind of instrumentalization. Is that the type of thing you think we ought to stamp out?
Yeah. It's just, and it's not, I just don't think we need it. I think you can find other ways to engage people in your story and help them understand like why you need to do certain things, but don't make it up just for people to buy into them. I don't have any patience.
Okay, another area where you have a sober assessment, I'd say, is artificial intelligence, and obviously that is heavily touted as being the future of learning. Could you speak about that field?
Well, so first of all, a disclaimer: I am by no means an artificial intelligence expert. I know very little about AI. So the first thing I would like to do is recommend a podcast that Donald Clark did with Learning Science Weekly, in which he explicitly discusses, great use cases around how AI is used in learning. I think I was actually reflecting on what we have in the book, and I think what is discussed in the book is still what we see, how AI is mostly used so far. And I would say probably also in the future. One is, AI for well-structured problems with, known outcomes, clear outcomes, I should say. The other one is more about, AI that's more responding to people's actions and behaviors, a bit more product type approach, like in LXPs.
Yeah.
And the other one is for ill-structured problems, which is obviously the most challenging part. And so if we think about, so one is for the clearly structured problems, is more about probably like human and AI partnerships, right? Where the AI will do the things that us humans cannot do, like keeping track of what learners are doing, how they're behaving, where they go wrong, and maybe provide some initial support or offer more of what they need. And then the system informs the human being. So the instructor or the coach or whatever can jump in when they see, oh, actually, this is not, they're really getting stuck or whatever. So I think that will become better over time. And also that data, right, can also feed into the design itself. So I think those are all things that are already happening and will become better over time. Another example is Dick Clark is working on research on AI doing cognitive task analysis, which to me is really fascinating. It's not that easy to find literature about it, but Trish Uhl has been speaking about it at Learning Technologies in 2019, if you want to look it up.
I was at that.
Yeah. So just for people who don't know what CTA is, like cognitive task analysis, like it's like an interview and observation strategies to capture, to elicit from experts how they perform complex tasks. So this research is trying to figure out how an AI system can interact with experts to elicit how they do things and capture it, which is super exciting because this piece of work is usually missing in organizations. We don't do very good analysis around how people actually do their jobs. To figure out how other people should learn how to do these same things, right? And it's very hard to train people in cognitive task analysis. I only know a handful of people who are good at it. Not that says everything, but in practice, I don't know. The people I've worked with don't do it. Have never done it. I've tried it, but it's not part of common practice. So if that would work, that would be great because it would give us so much more insight into how to design an intervention.
You are data.
You are data. You are data. You are data.
Every pulse of your heart, every step you take, the place you travel to, the thing that gets your attention, it all leaves a trace in data. And the world reconfigures itself around you, moment to moment, based on that data.
You are data. You are data.
Data has learned a lot about you over the years. Isn't it time you learned more about data?
You are data. You are data. You are data. You are data.
Data is a hot topic in learning right now, perhaps the hottest. But when you look at what's happened historically with learning analytics, it's hard to deny that it's been a little bit stuck. Stuck in the first two levels of Kirkpatrick. Stuck in what David Wilson and Charles Jennings have called the conspiracy of convenience. Stuck in a lack of capability, money, and time to evaluate. So how can we get ourselves out of this endless Mobius loop of wanting to do it all, but ending up not actually doing very much? I've talked to a lot of experts and practitioners, and the result is a whole series of guides and resources that Learning Pool will be releasing to help you map your way out of that loop. Download the first of these now. The Data and Learning White Paper.
You are data. You are data. You are data.
I'm really pleased that this episode is supported by NIIT, the global learning outsourcing company that helps organisations run training like a business. NIIT is dedicated to helping customers increase the business value of L&D. So whether it's reduced costs, increased flexibility and business alignment, technology innovation, or a dramatic improvement in learner experience you're after, you can trust NIIT to deliver measurable and transformative business impact. To learn more, visit niit.com. So interesting that focus on AI doing things that human beings can't do, because so often I think the press story is about, or the media story in general, is about AI doing things that humans can do and replacing them. And we have this kind of jealous older sibling relationship with AI that we feel we're about to be replaced and elbowed aside and all the rest of it. And that seems to kind of provide the emotional temperature for the whole of the debate. But as you say, it's really interesting to look at the things that we can't currently do, because so much innovation is about reframing the problem when a constraint, which was a constraint, suddenly isn't there anymore.
Yeah, and I think adaptive learning systems are an example of that as well, right? That's also about what people cannot do. And what LXPs are doing at the moment, I have concerns about, because to me, the risk is that it distracts from learning, because what it does, as far as I understand, so anybody who wants to correct me is fine to reach out, please. But what I've seen is what it does is it recommends more of what people already do, or more of who they perceive themselves to be or want to become, And so that whole assumption that people are good at like regulating their own behavior in that way, their own learning, is quite a leap. And it's not in any way like learning in the end, apart from, of course, like serendipitous learning and incidental learning. The way to think about it usually is that you want to achieve a certain goal, right? So what it should be doing ideally is support people to get there. And if you only give people what they want and what their preferences are and where they're clicking away, and then all you do is like invite them to butterfly around without any focus. So to me, it doesn't have anything to do with learning. It's more like a product, like Amazon type of thing. Like, oh, you wanted this, then you probably want this too. Well, for what purpose?
So we have a strong fix on technology in this podcast in general, and I notice, in fact, IT is one of the disciplines you mention among the learning sciences. So could you reflect on the role of digital technology in bringing evidence-informed design to the fore? In other words, how big a factor has it been in the current focus on learning science? And also, what role has it played historically since the 1970s, when you say that learning sciences began, in shaping our ideas about learning?
Yeah, so my initial reaction would be that in general, when it comes to learning design, which would be about learning effectiveness and efficiency, and maybe to what extent learning is enjoyable, which we define as more like self-efficacy, like to what extent do people perceive they can achieve success. If you look at it from that lens, I don't think digital technology is a factor that contributes to the evidence, because in that context, it's more about being the vehicle, while it's actually the underlying design that feeds into, to what extent it's more effective, efficient, or enjoyable. I know Donald Clark had an interesting perspective in that cognitivist podcast around, how computers have informed how memory were like our models. So you could say that from that perspective, yes.
Yeah, it was interesting in that podcast you mentioned how, as we looked at the cognitivists, Miller and so forth, and the people who began to map a model of the brain and short-term memory, and how that works, that right from the beginning with Miller, they were beginning to use the way that computers work as an analogy for the way that short-term working memory works and its various parts. And I thought that was quite interesting to me, because I'd always thought of technology as being the kind of carrier medium for what learning scientists were talking about and what learning designers would design. But it seems that it's helped to shape our understanding of learning during that period.
Yeah, I think that I would challenge that is about digital technology. That's to me more about the process that you then base your analogy on, is it not? Like the way a computer processes, it's the process more than the.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a if that's a fair thing to say, but.
Well, I think that there's kind of a compare and contrast activity going on there, because clearly the brain does stuff that computers don't, and works in quite a different way. But it was interesting to me how much it was implicated in that particular development of cognitive psychology through the 60s and 70s onwards.
Yeah, I also think, I think that also, a big part of it is data itself, right? Digital technology gives us data too. I don't know, it's maybe a bit of a byproduct, but we can, that has definitely informed learning sciences, right? Because we're using way more systems, so we can get to understand more easily how people behave and what they do. And we use eye tracking, for example, in academic research to see where people look on screens to get more insights into how people process information and how they go about completing tasks. So that's definitely something that, can inform design as well, obviously.
So I think what you're saying is that, well, extrapolating from that, perhaps, computers and IT give us a kind of new way of looking at information and how information works and how it's transmitted.
But also in human behavior, the way the human interacts with the technology and as the layer behind that, what's in the technology that they're engaging with to achieve what. So it can definitely give us a lot of insights into how people learn.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm struggling to get at here is what is the nub of that relationship? And I think you got a bit closer to it there.
I also want to say that, like, the Association for Educational Communications and Technology has been around since 1923. And in that year, Thomas Edison claimed also that motion pictures would take over books as instructional methodologies within 20 years or something, I think he said. So just, it's a bit of humbleness to anybody who claims that, digital technology is going to revolutionize how we learn, etc. That claim has been around for like 100 years now. So there's a bit of,
With such a big focus on learning science and theory, how does it feel when you turn to your practitioner role and find you have to compromise those principles in the light of hard commercial realities, if indeed you do?
Yeah, I always wonder why that is, though. I mean, my first question is, my first answer is that it can be frustrating, that you know that there are better ways, and that it's just really hard to convince other people that there are better ways because of reasons X, Y, Z. I do wonder, though, if it's because of commercial realities or because of other factors. One factor being the state that our field is in, that we're, not everybody is aware that there are better ways. So those people just keep doing what the business asks for, which is getting in the way, right, to improve our practice. There's also a side to, I'm just speculating here, this is just me theorizing, I have no idea which I think it's a little bit of everything, but I think it's also a little bit that the business has certain perceptions on what L&D does, based on our own behavior, but also based on what they think themselves to know about learning. Sometimes it's very hard to have conversations with business people because, everybody's a learner. Everybody has their own experience learning, and they sometimes have very strong opinions around how things should be done. And then we are not really seen as people with particular expertise.
So it's more about communication, perception, the power relationships and so on, than it is about actual commercial realities. I mean, it's not so much a case of, in the early days of the rise of e-learning, people found that you could save an awful lot of money by doing training that way. So, many kind of instructional thing of was it working or not, there was a big commercial driver to put stuff to digital that previously had been done through stand-up training. And that's not so much a factor now, presumably.
No, but I think there's still a lot of focus on efficiencies. And And what I have been trying to do with my clients is think about to what extent can we save money by stopping to do things that might be cheap, but might not, or cheaper, but might not add that much value.
Mm-hmm.
And to what extent can you then free up time and money to invest a bit more in the things that we should be doing better? But
Yeah.
currently we're kind of stuck in the everything has to happen fast. Everything has to be either cheap or very shiny, like serious games or whatever, and maybe you don't need one.
Yeah.
So I think we need to get better at analyzing what the actual need is, analyzing which problem type is best for that need, and then see, how many people are involved, how important is it for the business, so that you can make way better decisions around where to invest and where to go for kind of like quick and dirty. And quick and dirty is sometimes fine, right? I think there's a lot of focus also on making things look pretty. That doesn't add to learning effectiveness whatsoever.
I think it's a really interesting answer. Yeah, quick and dirty and cheap and shiny. You're talking the
or
language
expensive and shiny, but not necessarily effective.
You're talking the language of a marketing person there. Yes. For people who want to become more evidence informed, but feel a bit daunted by the sheer amount of theory and research there is to learn from, which we were talking about earlier, to return to that theme, what advice could you give for people in terms of focusing their efforts and their attention? In other words, are there particular schools or groups of theorists? You pick them out in kind of little groups like we're doing on the Donald podcast, or individual thinkers, in fact, that you can recommend as touchstones? Because, what I'm kind of saying is that you look at this massive wall of faces that Donald threw up on the Great Minds and Learning thing, and there's all that theory, all those books to read. What could you say to people about, okay, let's just cut away some of the noise, go for this people, those people, that group of people, this stuff's bunk, this is not? Do you have any of those? Can you give any shape to the field? Sorry, rather long question.
Yeah, so I think in general, people don't necessarily want to dive into the academic research, right?
Okay.
I think the majority doesn't really want to do that, is my assumption. So from that perspective, I would say focus on the research translators. So people who translate research to practice, people like Patty Shank, Will Thalheimer, Jane Bozard. Who else do I have? I have a note here. Connie Malamed, Clark Quinn, myself, and Paul. Donald Clark as well. So those are people who have, put in a lot of effort going through the research and trying to make it more practical for other people. So those people to me are great starting points. Also, that book that I just showed, How Learning Happens by Carl Hendrick and Paul Kirschner, simply because those theorists, I know Donald Clark had 100, but what they discuss in the book is clearly foundational and makes you really aware of just the giants in our field. And it's also quite broad, as in, it's about motivation, it's about goal setting, it's about memory. So it covers the basics of learning as well. Then people, like if you're more interested in things like social learning, for example, then, Etienne Wenger's work would be a good starting point. Might be a bit theoretical for some people, but it's definitely worth knowing that it's there around communities of practice, because communities are really popular in organizations. But I think it's very much focused on just sharing, and that's that. While Wenger would give you some pointers around how to get more value out of them. Informal learning, Victoria Marsick, Michael Eraut, good starting points. Performance consulting, Guy Wallace, Gary Rumler, Tom Gilbert, Dick Clark knows a lot about cognitive task analysis and performance-focused approaches. And then in the end, it's also up to the individual to think about, what do I care about, and what is lacking, like where do I feel I have gaps. But I would definitely start with research to practice translators.
And you've got some, and you've got some very good tips in the book, I think, for sorting out the wheat from the chaff. How to tell a chaff merchant.
Like, you mean like the 4 steps?
Yes.
I think the 4 steps, just real quick for the listener, is more about making, following 4 steps to, if you read something or see something, to be able to quickly identify if something is more towards truth or truthiness. So in other words, how trustworthy it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's so crystal clear when you start to follow these steps and you read something on LinkedIn or whatever, and you're like, oh gosh, this sounds, it's so clear that it's not based on anything.
Yeah. So a healthy skepticism, or as Ernest Hemingway would call it, a bullshit detector, a very important piece of kit for the modern learning professional, I think.
For sure, yes.
Mirjam, I think you've given us a really good summary of the book and exposition of some of the things, the trends of thought in the book that aren't necessarily explicit there. It's been really interesting for me to talk to you. I wish we had longer. Where should people go if they want to follow your thought? And what is really fascinating you at the moment, and where can they find out about that?
So, of course, we have our blog on 3starlearningexperiences.wordpress.com.
Okay.
You can follow me on Twitter, Mirjam N, Mirjam.
Yes, I'm sorry. I've been in a very illiterate way, kind of pronouncing your name as Mirjam up to now, which I don't know why I've done that.
Well, loads of people do that, so don't feel bad about it.
It's just me.
Because the J in Dutch is pronounced je, so that's why it's Mirjam. I'm on LinkedIn. The stuff I'm fascinated about at the moment. I'm always fascinated about loads of things, but for the Learning and Development Conference, which is organized by Will Thalheimer and Matthew Richter, I'm working on the learning path on worked examples. So I'm doing a lot of work at the moment on worked examples and how to work with subject matter experts to get good worked examples. Also, self-directed learning. I keep thinking about how we can implement that better or structure that better in organizations. I think that's more for 2022. So those are a couple of things.
So we'll look out for that, and we'll be very self-directed in considering you a very exemplary figure. God, that's a cheesy sign-off. Thank you anyway. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to Mirjam and to our sponsors Learning Pool and NIIT. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. Please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube.
You can tweet me at John Helmer or contact me through my website, johnhelmerconsulting.com.
Coming up on the Learning Hack.
Next time it's Stella Collins, Brain Lady, tackling the topic of difficulty in learning. To make sure you don't miss that and all the other goodies we've got in store, hit that subscribe button now.
Stay evidence-informed, learning people.
I finally get it.
It is, and I can get on with buying a house.
Yeah, good luck with that.